Good afternoon, our PCVs and friends. Welcome to our panel, Peace Corps Safety and Security, a decade of legislation for change. Throughout the course of this year's Peace Corps Connect conference, we've been tackling difficult and complex issues, and we really thank you for joining us in this critical conversation and reflection. As we're all unfortunately aware, issues relating to sexual assault, to violence against women and others, to inadequate health care span the globe. They color the history books. And Peace Corps is no exception to that narrative. Peace Corps is not immune to these challenges, and they remain with us today as well as throughout our history. As many in the audience know, especially for those participating in this morning's annual general membership meeting, NPCA's first goal is to help the Peace Corps be the best that it can be. For topics where improvement is still needed, we want to take a moment and learn from the past, to understand where we are now, and to mobilize for the future in alignment with our conference theme. In this panel, we want to reflect back on the last decade, review the passage of laws aimed at improving and addressing challenges in volunteer safety and health, to consider how successful those laws have been in bringing about progress and change, to explore where those efforts have fallen short, and finally, to consider what steps to take moving forward and to identify special opportunities in this unique moment we are in right now. We've assembled several panelists today, each bringing a different experience to contribute to this conversation. And yet it bears noting that there are many other voices in this conversation as well. We'll discuss a few ways at the close of this session, in which the conversation will continue. We understand these are difficult and intense topics, and we really appreciate our panelists being with us today. I'm grateful to each of them for their willingness to engage, their candid criticism, and their desire to help build something better. I'll introduce each panelist individually and ask them to share their stories, and then we will broaden the conversation and continue with a more open dialogue. Before I go into the panelists, I'll take a moment to introduce myself. I know many of you have known me through the years. My name is Mari Carmen Smith Martinez. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Costa Rica from 2006 to 2008. I served as a rural community development volunteer. I have been on the board of the National Peace Corps Association since 2014, and I have served as chair since 2018. In this time, I've been actively involved with NPCA advocacy efforts as part of our goal to help Peace Corps be its best. But even before joining the NPCA board, my first foray into advocacy for volunteer health and volunteer protection and safety actually began as a member of Atlanta area Returned Peace Corps volunteers after hearing Kate Puzey's mother speak at Peace Corps 50th anniversary events in March of 2011. As part of the broader NPCA network, AARPCV, as the organization is known, coordinated advocacy efforts to advance legislation for protection of Peace Corps volunteers. I am mindful that tomorrow, September 26th, will mark 10 years since the US Senate passed the Kate Puzey Peace Corps Volunteer Protection Act, which was signed into law 2 months later. And that brings me to our first panelists. These 10 years later, I've been privileged to meet one of the activists that led the charge in securing the passage of the Puzey Act. Casey Frazee Katz created First Response Action and built a grassroots network through this group to push this legislation forward until it was passed in 2011. Casey, can you start by telling us a bit about your experience, how you created First Response Action, and what you hope to achieve in that process?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me be part of this process. It was an honor to serve as a volunteer, and I'm happy that I was able to serve in a different capacity to try to get the efforts that were important to us pushed forward. So as Mari Carmen mentioned, I was a volunteer in South Africa, and unfortunately during my service, I was sexually assaulted. What I found pretty quickly is that there were other volunteers in South Africa and other countries across the African continent, in other countries across the globe who had also been sexually assaulted or harassed. And what I couldn't find were rules, laws, information, resources for someone who had been sexually assaulted as a volunteer. And so I founded First Response Action after I returned from service in 2009 to work towards getting protections, support, resources, information codified for volunteers, whatever shape that might take. We initially started working with Peace Corps administration, and quickly it became obvious that we needed to take a step up. We began working with legislators and also pulled in other returned volunteers and families of other volunteers, returned or otherwise, including Kate Puzey's family. In that, we drafted the initial legislation, which of course went through many, many rounds before that was signed in 2011, to codify some of those supports for volunteers so that they knew what they had access to establish victim advocacy. I'm grateful that 10 years later, victim advocacy still exists within the Peace Corps. This is certainly still an issue that is ongoing. So I'm grateful that the NPCA is hosting this panel today and keeping this issue top of mind.
Thank you, Casey. And it is remarkable the effort that it takes, and the phrase of it takes a village. And there have been others to help to carry that forward and to really drive the work that you started over a decade ago. We'll talk next with someone who's been engaged in part of the aftermath of the Puzey Act and one of the outcomes of that legislation. And one of the results of that was the creation of the Sexual Assault Advisory Council. For those of us participating on Thursday, we heard Acting Director Carol Spahn speak about this topic during her Q&A chat with NPCA President and CEO Glenn Blumhorst. In her comments, Acting Director Spahn noted that the council is hard at work. They're in the process of reviewing findings, reports, recommendations over the past 5 years. They'll be developing an update to consider where the agency has moved forward and how to further those advancements. And she noted that a report will be forthcoming at the end of this year, and that report will be made public. Sue, I'm really interested in what you have to share about your experience on the council. I believe your perspective could offer really helpful insight for our broader community. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, about your experience on the council, and your role in that process?
Sure, thank you, Mary Carmen. So my name is Susan Howley. I was a victim advocate at the national policy level for more than 25 years, which means that I was working with people around the country as they passed their first victims' rights laws, their first constitutional amendments. I was part of the group that passed the first Violence Against Women Act, and then the second Violence Against Women Act, and then the third. Now there's a fourth. Where I worked with people who helped name and develop a response to stalking and human trafficking, worked to address the DNA backlog, worked with those raising awareness and calling for change in the military, on college campuses, in churches, in youth organizations about sexual assault. I now work in a program called the Center for Victim Research, which is devoted to trying to build an evidence base for how we can better support victims and survivors. But in 2012, I was part of the first Sexual Assault Advisory Council, and I served on the first 4 years of that council. So as you all may recall, the Kate Puzey Act called for the creation of a Sexual Assault Advisory Council, which was to review the required trainings and response that the Peace Corps developed, to make sure that the Peace Corps had worked with experts in developing the responsive policies and trainings, and to determine whether those were developed and conformed to best practices to the extent practicable. And I was reflecting on the makeup of the Sexual Assault Advisory Council. You know, that first one included probably the lead victim advocate from the military for sexual assault victims, a very highly placed victim advocate from the FBI, the victim advocate from the State Department, national advocacy organizations, and some leading experts from the medical profession in what is the best response to sexual assault victims. So by the time that council met for the first time, the Peace Corps had already taken steps to begin to stand up an office for victim advocacy. They developed and piloted their first training. There was already a risk reduction and response programming beginning to be put in place, and there were plans to research and monitor those impacts. So the Sexual Assault Advisory Council got an orientation to how do things work in the Peace Corps. We were particularly asked to advise on certain things, and one of those was the creation of a restricted reporting process where volunteers could report confidentially and access services and supports, maybe learn a little bit more about what would happen were they to report officially. And so that was one of the first major things that we advised on. What really struck me at the time were the complexities involved. So, unlike a US-based institution, there's no uniform justice system around the world. And in fact, Peace Corps has no criminal jurisdiction over foreign actors. The recognition of sexual assault was far from universal around the world, especially for crimes that don't involve penetration. Certainly no uniform understanding of what sexual harassment is or that it's wrong. Mental health response wasn't consistently available in different countries. Unlike the military, there was no universal authority over anyone who might be involved in the assault or the response. So, even where one volunteer assaulted another, the Peace Corps didn't have the same ability to hold someone accountable that you might have in the military. Unlike on a college campus where there are only one or two opportunities to reach the bulk of volunteers for training. In fact, I remember Peace Corps wanted to do a survey of RPCVs to find out more about the extent of sexual assault and harassment. That was a heavy lift because RCPVs are no longer, employees or affiliated with the Peace Corps, which meant you had to go through a whole process with OMB before you could even think about having some kind of survey like. So it was just really complex. How do you train in-country staff? How often do they get together? Remember, right now, we're so used to doing all these trainings by Zoom. It was a different world 10 years ago. It was really a lot more complex. I remember there were a lot of issues that came up when the Peace Corps was developing things like restrictive reporting, like the Inspector General didn't understand why they didn't automatically get all reports, even those that were confidential. Country directors, it took some time for them to understand that they could not automatically get responses from about, or could not get all information about confidential or restricted reports. So really a lot of things had to be worked through. So with the Sexual Assault Advisory Council, each year, the council would come together. We would get a briefing on new adjustments, new progress, new evolutions in trainings or policies. We would hear what happened to the previous year's recommendations, which ones had the Peace Corps agreed with and were adopting, which ones did the Peace Corps partially agree with, which ones did they disagree with and why. And then we would meet to review everything new and make a new set of recommendations. So you'd help try to identify best practices and then try to adapt them to the Peace Corps situation. But again, in this context, the term best practices is really best that we know right now. So often you're pointing to a program that worked for that group of people in that context. Does it work over here with these people? So even with best practices, it's really trying to figure out what is out there that we can learn from. Where there were no best practices, the Peace Corps and the Sexual Assault Advisory Council just relied on some key principles of trying to be as transparent as possible and trying to give victims options wherever possible. And we came to realize that was the best approach you can take. You create the best trainings and policies that you can at the moment, you implement them, and then you monitor them, and then you see where things aren't working and you adjust. And there are new opportunities for improvement all the time. I mentioned Zoom, so there are new opportunities for virtual response and for training. There are there's new understanding of what does it mean to be trauma informed that we didn't have before, new understandings of what does it mean to be victim centered. And of course, I have to say, you can't have a system of continual improvement without hearing from those for whom the current system is not working. There have to be systems to identify and learn from the cases where risk reduction failed or the response was harmful. We also have to support those victims who do come forward after being failed and to recognize their courage and advocate for them. It's worth noting here that improvements in our system of response to victims and survivors of crime in all kinds of settings, including the Peace Corps, have largely occurred because someone who was harmed or was close to someone who was harmed said, this has to change. And then even where we make major improvements, the struggle for all of us is to recognize that this has to change is a repeated theme. There's always more to do to ensure a victim-centered response and working support system. I can't think of a single area of crime victim response where advocates have been able to say, now we're done. Now we have a system where every crime victim gets a just and compassionate response. The most we can say in any arena is, this is an improvement, and what's next? And so I'm so grateful to people like Casey and Sue Castle, who we're about to hear from, in helping us think about what's next. Did I go on too long? I'm sorry.
That was perfect, Susan. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear some of the complexities specific to Peace Corps, some of the broadened insight that was brought from other areas. I think it also speaks a lot to the fact that this is not unique to Peace Corps. This is prevalent everywhere, and we are all learning how to address it better and how to better support survivors. There's always another role to take, and to that end, I want to move in a bit of a different direction. Susan mentioned mental health care and mental health in general, and the other aspect, in addition to volunteer safety, we want to discuss is with health and health care for Peace Corps volunteers. Moving into our next speaker, I've first met Sue Castle several years ago through NPCA advocacy efforts. She and her husband Dave were working closely with members of Congress to draft and to advance the legislation that is now named after their son. They have been fully engaged with NPCA efforts to support it since in advance of its passing. In 2019, during NPCA's National Day of Action, I had the opportunity to walk the halls of Congress with Sue and with Dave. And I've seen firsthand the powerful impact of their story when shared with our members of Congress. And to that end, I've also seen how difficult it can be to repeat this story over and again. Sue, I know it never gets any easier, but could you share with us a little bit about Nick and how you came to be so engaged in our community?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. All right, so I must thank everyone who's here, who have dedicated their time and effort in supporting reform efforts, and with that, supporting the Peace Corps. Yet, for me, it's pretty disheartening because it is 10 years after the Puzey Protection Act was signed into law, and we are still here trying to see it followed. So my story, a month after graduating from UC Berkeley in 2012, my son Nick was sent to China as a Peace Corps volunteer. He became quite ill while serving, and he died in February of 2013. The medical care he received by a PCMO was poor and contributed to his death. My primary goal in being involved in advocacy was to prevent what happened to my son Nick would never happen to another volunteer. Sadly, that did not happen. In 2018, another volunteer died due to poor medical care. Policies were not being followed. It's heartbreaking for me to see this. So Peace Corps is supposed to be about what is best about American service, to not only serve, but to learn about the cultures, values, and traditions of other countries. But the Peace Corps fails when it comes to taking care of their volunteers who've had a difficult service. Volunteers who return home ill or disabled have difficulty receiving health care. Volunteers who are a victim of a crime or sexual assault have difficulty seeing any resolution to their case and in receiving the proper mental health services in order to move forward in processing their trauma. Many times, these volunteers take their case publicly to bring attention to their issues, hoping to get help. To get help. I can tell you, no one wants to have to go public and sharing some of the worst moments of their life, yet they continued to be ignored by the Peace Corps. In 2011, the Cape Puzey Protection Act was signed into law. In 2018, the Sam Farr and Nick Peace Corps Reform Act was signed into law. It extends some of the provisions in the Cape Puzey Act, yet some of these provisions remain vague or open to interpretation. And I've talked to members in Congress about how vague some of these provisions are. Some issues remain confidential and are unable to be discussed. Medical performance reviews of PCMOs are kept confidential. And so what I have found out in Peace Corps advocacy is that everyone has different interests. Many want to see an increase in funding, and many want to see safety and sexual assault addressed more thoroughly. Some want to see growth or an expansion of the Peace Corps. In my case, I want to see better healthcare and training, and I want to see that before any growth or expansion of the Peace Corps. Peace Corps needs to take care of their volunteers. They have to have the same, if not greater, commitment to the care and safety of their volunteers as they have to the countries they serve. I want to see professional PCMOs where there's less encouragement to tough it out or be ignored and a more thorough examination of the patient. I want to see medical training that reflects current standard and reviews that accurately reflect the competency of the PCMO. Cultural bias remains strong and can be difficult to overcome, and there needs to be more training in regards to that. Voices with more recent experience in regard to safety and sexual assault need to be acknowledged and not dismissed. They need to be part of the conversation, whether it was from 2015 or from 2020. These issues continue, and the approach that the Peace Corps has taken has not translated into long-standing change. New ways of dealing with these issues need to be explored. The cost of advocacy is high. When you have to retell your story over and over again, you're reliving that trauma. Peace Corps shouldn't have to wait for a response because of a story in the Daily Beast, the New York Times, or the USA Today. They need to do better.
Thank you, Sue, for, as you put it, reliving your trauma with us and helping to try and push this agenda forward. If I could ask all of our panelists to turn on your cameras, we'll dive in now to some of deeper comments into the reflections that you've made. Some questions will be a bit more individual and some will be a bit more open-ended for anyone to answer. I did want to start with a point that Susan made about research and the work that the council had done in trying to build more, basically create more data and have more information available to be able to put together better monitoring and hold Peace Corps accountable for these improvements and changes. Casey, I know you started before all of these efforts with your initial advocacy. What kind of research was lacking when you had were putting together the grassroots efforts with First Response Action, and what would have been helpful for you at that time in terms of research and data?
Absolutely. So I think at that moment, as I mentioned earlier, when I started talking to people in my group and people knew that I was assaulted and they knew of other people who had come through South Africa who'd also been assaulted and or had been in other countries and maybe medevac to South Africa as a hub. And so once I knew that anecdotally, this was an issue, but we just didn't have numbers. We just didn't have the data. So one of the things that I started doing is that I created a survey, a very basic survey that I asked for currently serving Peace Corps volunteers to send out and share as widely as they could throughout the Peace Corps community, so that we could try to get some better numbers and better data about who had been assaulted, which countries, maybe were there some hotspots or particular issues, what was their response? Did they feel supported? Did they not feel supported? That data was very helpful to see that the vast majority, I would say, of the survey results we received, give or take 3/4 of people felt that they were not supported. We were hopeful to go in the direction then of the 1/4 of people who did feel supported, and what happened there, and how were they connected? How were they resourced? So from my end, from the advocacy and the activist work that I did, I felt like that's the research I needed, the data on what was happening, what's the issue, so then we know what to do next.
And Susan, do you think that the efforts that the council is taking are setting the stage for an evidence-based driven approach moving forward?
Yes, but of course, there's always more to be done. I mean, first of all, there's now a fully functioning RPCV survey, which will be very helpful. And there's about to be a new database that will make it easier to pull out data and keep victims' information confidential, but pull out more data about what has happened, the kinds of responses people are getting. You will still have to have a system that makes it comfortable for people who feel that they were failed to come forward and report, whether that's anonymously or identifying themselves. That just like there's no best practice in response, there's also no best practice in gathering this kind of data. We've tried, national victimization surveys, local victimization surveys, college there's always a better way to improve the response rates, to improve the accuracy and understanding. It's like everything else, you're going to have to do your best and then try to build on that each year. I do understand that the Peace Corps is about to undertake a more formal evaluation of its programs, and that's also very important, because one step there is to try to really define, articulate what are the outcomes we are looking for, and then what are the indicators that we'll be able to gather that will show us whether we're getting those outcomes. The outcomes are typically, we want people who have been victimized to thrive in the future. So then you have to think in terms of what is it that they might tell us is happening in the short term that we can know as an indicator that they'll thrive in the future. But again, it's a lot of work. You have to keep working at it and refining it.
Absolutely. And Acting Director Spahn had made reference to the efforts the agency is taking in that assessment of the sexual assault and risk reduction response program. So I hope that reflection over the past 8 years since that program has been established will also advance what its shortcomings have been and inform how to fill those gaps. In a bit of a different documentation side, Sue, I know you've spoken a lot about documentation as well in terms of ways to improve agency response. If things are not documented appropriately, we are liable to repeat mistakes. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on opportunities for improved documentation and record keeping.
Well, what they need to do is hold people accountable for when they aren't documenting, because it always tends to come out that they omitted something, that they did not document an incident, whether it's a safety and security or a healthcare incident, and then it will come out later. And these people, there's no accountability for not documenting, even though they've got the medical records databases out there, and I know that they're going to be having a new security systems management system put into place. So, training is critical, but it's also, I think there's a cultural bias as to dismissing some of the health concerns or security concerns that they're just dismissed. So that's why they're not documented. And I think the training needs to be, they need to document everything, that you're not going to be punished for documenting, but you are going to be held accountable if you're not documenting.
And I know we'd spoken in earlier conversations in preparation about the sort of balance between legislation and that accountability. As a sort of open question, given the challenges that we confront, I'm wondering about our overall thoughts. Is this a matter of needing more legislation as we are advocating, for example, for the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act? Or is it a matter of better implementing the legislation that we have passed, the Kate Puzey Act, the Farr-Castle Act, and what types of measures would help to support improved implementation so that we are holding ourselves accountable and we are holding Peace Corps accountable?
Well, I think the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act is a great piece of legislation. It covers a lot of issues within the Peace Corps, the GS7 to 11. It extends the whistleblower protection. It expands on a lot of different things. And I think it respect for Peace Corps. There's a lot of different things in there. And I think it's great. As far as prior legislation, I think it needs to be implemented. And as I said, it can be very vague. And, in the Farr-Castle legislation, it's, evaluations of PCMOs. Well, nobody can see those, other than Peace Corps. Those are confidential. Or the training and the hiring, that's all pretty subjective. So do we need more legislation? No, we need it implemented, what we're doing, but we also need accountability. It shouldn't take this long to implement legislation.
It is astonishing sometimes the complexities of government. I think even hearing some of Susan's comments in the difficulties of the council in accessing information and understanding why certain things could or could not be done, the difference for the Peace Corps as an agency and the unique position of volunteers all present just a different situation that still needs to be addressed, but does create just additional complications. I want to just clarify for people in general, the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act, highlighting a couple of the specific provisions. Sue mentioned GS7 to 11. It's a workers' compensation. So the legislation proposes a long-needed increase in the workers' compensation rate for RPCVs who come home and are unable to work because of a service-related illness or injury. So it's specific to a specific measure that was excluded from earlier pieces of legislation as an important part of continuing advancements for in healthcare for volunteers who have returned. Sue also mentioned the whistleblower protection for volunteers. The legislation would also increase the period in which Peace Corps would pay for post-service insurance, extending that time from 1 month to 3 months. That's something that we saw in the post-evacuation as well, and trying to make that a more permanent approach. And the legislation also proposes further reporting concerning post-service mental health care provided to return volunteers. And just highlighting a bit of the provisions in why that Reauthorization Act is so important. But returning into the implementation question, I know that we've spoken a lot during this conference about the unique time for Peace Corps. We don't have any volunteers overseas for the first time in 60 years. Never been in this position since Peace Corps' establishment. And so you've spoken a little bit to the need to make change before growing and expanding, and that that is a goal of NPCA's, to help Peace Corps to increase, to advance the number of volunteers. But as has been said, we need to make sure that that is a safe environment, and that the circumstances and protections are there for volunteers before we're getting to that growth stage. So in this current situation, whenever it is safe for volunteers to begin to redeploy, Peace Corps does hope to begin in a gradual redeployment in more of starting with a few countries that meet COVID protocols as early 2022. I know that every time a sort of time frame is established, it has needed to be pushed back, so don't want to target the date. But what might this gradual reintroduction of volunteers into the field mean when it comes to improving the safety and security of volunteers in terms of piloting and other measures?
Well, from what I understand, that they're already working on improving mental health resources or behavioral health resources for volunteers, which I think is can be really important. We're not talking like long-term serious mental health issues, but sometimes probably even going out back into the field during this time of COVID could probably be more stressful than it normally would be for a volunteer to go back. So I know they're talking about expanding that, and I think that's a good first step. But I was listening to a panel earlier today, and the volunteer said she could not get any mental health care when she returned. She said, and she lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, in close to a lot of resources. She said everybody on her list that she called, like, they didn't know why they were on the list, and they couldn't offer her any resources. And Peace Corps was like, just make the best of what you can do. Like, so if the resources aren't available, you can't do anything. So I think that needs to be firmed up. They need to have actual people who are going to take this insurance, that are going to be able to offer these services. And currently now, during COVID, so many services have gone to Zoom. Mental health is a big one that people are Zooming with counselors and therapists. And so I would think that would be an easier fix for the Peace Corps to implement, since it's so readily available in so many places. But it's a matter of who's going to take your insurance. So, having those mental health resources can eliminate a lot of other problems for volunteers, that they might be facing. The medical training, they say that they're implementing a lot of training right now, but I'm not exactly sure what. I'm trying to get more details on that. So it's like, there's not a lot of accountability, or there's not a lot of communication between like a site in Washington, D.C., or even between a site and the regional director, even though they say that it's there. They say that it's there, but I haven't seen it in practice. So I'm hoping that training, since there's going to be so few sites that are going to be deploying, that they'll be able to find out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in the coordination, as in particular. I think there are some very unique training opportunities right now in terms of even small scale pilots. And it should theoretically be easier to coordinate with fewer locations and getting just more immediate feedback loops and trying to replicate those loops as they continue to expand countries in coordinating between posts and between Washington. In terms of the training, I know there's other training opportunities. Susan, are there any instances that the council has discussed and other training opportunities as just thinking through the redeployment and how we can re-envision what this looks like?
I've not been part of the current council, so I don't know what they're considering, but there has been such an explosion in developing high quality online trainings now, more than ever before, not only through Zoom, but other adult learning that can take place online and reinforce what someone is learning that we just didn't have 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I think there is new opportunity. And I agree that having a phased sort of relaunch of Peace Corps into the field can provide a natural opportunity to test out some new approaches.
Casey, what would you add to the conversation around redeployment and that phased approach and opportunities that Peace Corps might take?
Absolutely. I think immediately what comes to my mind, especially thinking of the council working on risk reduction, is evaluating sites. I wouldn't say that Peace Corps is inherently unsafe for anyone or inherently safe for anyone. I think about my situation, I think about other survivors who I met with and talked with, and there are elements, and these are not surprises. Some of these are just elements of crime that exist in all areas. Sexual assault, sadly, and sexual harassment are issues that tend to have several commonalities, and one of them sometimes is just opportunity. And often if volunteers are in, let's say, a rural area, maybe with very limited cell phone reception, no independent way to get out of their site, that makes someone a little bit of a sitting duck to someone who knows that, sees that, and takes advantage of that. So I think as as no one is in the field then now in terms of volunteers, that gives a unique opportunity to evaluate and maybe create, I don't know exactly currently what happens in terms of trying to identify sites and what those criteria are. But I think that is an opportunity that Peace Corps has to evaluate how safe a site is or how many risk factors exist at a site, and what resources someone has access to be able to get to safety or just support as they need it. I think too, if I can add something small to that, there's a book, I don't know if anyone is familiar with this, called Sexual Citizens by Jennifer Hirsch and Seamus Khan. I believe it was published last year. It's an incredible book, and one of the elements that they talk about in Sexual Citizens is sexual geography. And they particularly look at college campuses and sexual assault and harassment, and also on the positive, just sexual experiences of college students. And one of the elements they talk about in sexual geography is that sometimes how sexual assaults occur is that if someone's in a residence hall, which again is not inherently safe or unsafe, but it can create an environment for where sexual assault may happen more readily, or someone may take advantage of a situation to perpetrate against someone based on maybe just the size of that space or what they have access to, or they don't have another place to go. In a basic residence hall, there might be a bed and a desk and a chair, right? There's not maybe a seating area. So with a college example. And so I think there's really good information, Peace Corps could distill from that to apply to a Peace Corps context of evaluating what's the geography of a site, what's the safety, what are the access points someone has in terms of, again, cell phone reception, transportation, ability to protect themselves, or again, seek resources after that.
Great opportunities. I hope I know this is being recorded, but I hope we're able to capture this a bit more effectively as well, and reflect these ideas in some of the planning approach. I want to switch back into some of the advocacy work, partially in anticipation of some of the continuing work around the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act. Maybe Sue and Casey, if each of you could share a little of your experience in how, when sharing your stories with members of Congress, how people react to you, and what your experience has been on both sides of the aisle, particularly, you know, as we are in a current environment of difficulty with bipartisanship. Peace Corps is typically viewed as a bipartisan institution, but I'm wondering if you can share a bit about your experience and those reactions and sort of what that looked like for each of you.
So I've been to Capitol Hill. I can't even tell you how many times I've been to Capitol Hill, and met locally with representatives. Peace Corps is always viewed, you know, through a bipartisan lens, at least from my experience. I can tell you that being in person versus a phone call or a letter makes a world of difference. The impact that you have in person, people can't dismiss you. I can tell you, I've been heavily criticized and dismissed online, whereas in person at different events and on the Hill, that people understand your story in a different way. They see you as human, whereas online, it's just very easy to dismiss people. You know, there's so much going on in the world. The last time I was in Washington, D.C. was in March. Well, no, I just came back actually, so I was just there. But before that was in March, right before COVID hit, and when everything was evacuated. And it was a tough time just because there was so much uncertainty going on in the world. So many support the Peace Corps, the mission of the Peace Corps and what they do in Congress, and they want to see it better. There's a few on the Hill that are not fans of the Peace Corps and want to see it dismantled. But for the most part, I would say everybody is very supportive and very supportive to those who advocate for change.
So this, you know, might be a little bit funny since our advocacy really was about a decade ago. And it's funny because I remember at the time people said, gosh, you're so lucky that this moved through so quickly. And this was, you know, bipartisan effort, we know with how divided everyone is. And that was 10 years ago. So that's wild to think where we are today. I think what surprised me is that people who we thought would be natural allies, maybe who were in Peace Corps, maybe were our PCV members of the Senate or Congress, were not necessarily immediate supporters of our efforts. I think that was maybe, it was more disheartening to me maybe than I had expected. I think similar to what Sue was talking about, with some people calling for dismantling Peace Corps, you know, we found that that was the issue people were afraid of, is that maybe we wanted, in bringing up this issue, to dismantle, which we had no plans for, no ideas for. None of us wanted that to happen. We believe in Peace Corps as an institution. We believe that Peace Corps does good work. We just wanted to make sure that Peace Corps was also accountable and supportive. And I think these are reasonable measures. And hearing what Sue is talking about in terms of PCMO training, that is very reasonable. I don't think that these are unreasonable concerns that Sue and her group and their advocacy work and what we have done over the years, and I'm in touch with other RPCVs who are also currently doing advocacy work. These are fairly reasonable requests in my mind. However, there is a pandemic to deal with and the current political climate, which can make things a bit more challenging. You know, people always say, right, Peace Corps is about as American as apple pie. There is such hope in Peace Corps and such good work. And I think in the best case scenario, I think Peace Corps and those who can support Peace Corps in the legislature can really have Peace Corps be a model for at least what America views as supporting survivors, supporting infrastructure, supporting sustainability and economies and all of this great work that Peace Corps does around the globe. And then also make sure that happens internally and that there is follow through. I think, Mary, comment to your earlier question, legislation is one part, but the implementation and the follow through and the training and assessment, that matters too. It's the whole pie, it's everything. So that's what I would add.
And clearly each of you have put an incredible amount of effort in respective at respective times. I'm mindful that even just hearing, Sue, your comment about you're not sure how many times you've been to Capitol Hill. For people that don't know, Sue comes from California, so that's not just like a hop skip. You know, it's not. I'm in DC. I can see the Capitol from where I live, so it's quite different. Coming in and really making that dedicated effort to having those conversations and making sure that your voice is heard. How, given that process is daunting, it's draining, you can't do it forever, how can others help support those efforts? There's a lot of people on this call now, and hopefully those that will hear this in the future. How can we amplify your voices and make sure that we're creating a greater opportunity for those voices to be heard?
Well, there's always people coming forward with their stories. And there's, you know, quite a few groups out there that are highly critical of the Peace Corps that do not get the time that I get. But I've been doing this for a while. You know, my point has been always to make the Peace Corps better for its volunteers. I mean, that's just always been my point. I do not have the influence, nor do I care to say, you know, join the Peace Corps or don't join the Peace Corps. I've done recruiting events for the Peace Corps and have shared my story, surprisingly enough, and I got great feedback and support. I just want people to be aware, but I also want people to be involved. And like I said, everybody has a different approach to advocacy, whether it's asking for more money or asking for growth. And that's okay. But I also want to take care of the volunteers, you know. So I think the voices that are coming up, everybody's voice needs to be acknowledged, whether you agree with it or not. They're painful conversations to have, but they're necessary. And it's only going to make the Peace Corps better.
I would echo that sentiment. I think people continuing to reach out, people continuing to share, and I think on the other end of that spectrum, thinking of the work that the council does, thinking of solutions, looking at the agency itself. That is wonderful news to hear that the agency is planning to do an evaluation internally, and then look at those next steps forward and then implementing those steps. I think everyone being able to help push the Reauthorization Act forward is certainly very critical. I would probably also be remiss to say, at least with the advocacy work that we did 10 years ago, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we also, you know, in addition to the volunteers, return volunteers, We were also supported by a legal team who helped us prepare for the hearing and get affidavits together from survivors. We started as a very grassroots effort, and I just knew that it could be uphill forever for us. And I knew that I couldn't do that forever. And so I'm grateful to others who know more than I do and who have that legal knowledge, who were able to help put those pieces together. So there are many levels of support I think that these kinds of efforts need. These are complex issues and sometimes require complex solutions.
And Susan, interested in your reflections on the advocacy, just ways to support as well, even from the research standpoint, and sort of how to drive points home with our members of Congress.
The voice of the individual is still so key in advocacy efforts. Legislators and policymakers will tell you that they want data, they want facts, they want to see the logic, but it's the real story that brings it home, that really makes that data and research come alive for a legislator and their staff and makes them care. It's just so crucial to have the voices of the individuals and to have those stories. That it's just so powerful.
Thank you. And building on a couple items that Sue said in terms of there's more voices, I wanted to highlight a few continuing conversations. In the healthcare space, we have 3 panelists here today. They're representative of different aspects of this conversation over the last decade plus. There's many other people that contribute to this conversation that have supported these 3 and others. Just acknowledging a few of those people, especially those with Health Justice for Peace Corps volunteers, and Nancy Young, Sarah Thompson, and many individuals who have been part of that affiliate group and fought for improvements to post-service healthcare, including a few of the provisions that are in the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act. Putting a quick plug in, NPCA will be organizing a program later this year to further discussion and consider the issues around health justice for Peace Corps volunteers. So please follow NPCA's e-news or check out our events calendar for more information as the details of that program come together. And regarding sexual assault and continuing that conversation, I wanted to commend and acknowledge our PCVW. They'll be hosting upcoming town hall sessions on the topic of sexual assault, and you can refer to the RPCVW newsletter if you are already a subscriber, or visit their website for more information. In terms of the kind of look forward, I know all of you are here with a desire to help Peace Corps be the best that it can be. What is really your driving factor for how to achieve that vision, and what motivates you to be here and continue this conversation? And maybe we can start with Casey and Susan and finish with Sue with that.
Sure, absolutely. I think similarly, again, this is a complex issue, and I think it requires engagement at many levels. Certainly having the legislation to codify these changes and policies and things like that are very important. Also the agency itself, really taking some deep reflections, making changes that are sustainable. And I think similar to what Susan had said earlier, these also are things that are continual. So if whatever process is put in place needs to be continually evaluated and monitored and reassessed and re-implemented. That's, I'd imagine, what many Peace Corps volunteers around the globe have done for years, right, with evaluation and monitoring. This is no different. And then I think too, along with just individual folks, people who may have a story to share or want to support, or those who are legislators or who might be friends of their legislators and who want to reach out. I think those are really, I think anyone can play a key role depending on what they have access to and what their skills and their knowledge are.
I would say it has been, for me, such a privilege to be a part of the Peace Corps' work in this area. And I have seen from individual staff a real heartfelt desire to improve things. And I am here because I just want to encourage all the RPCVs to stay engaged, to think about how you can support the what's called the quality assurance process of helping to, you know, turn over the rocks, see what's still there, see what still needs to be addressed, and then support change within the agency to continue to evolve and be the best it can be.
I just want to say that, you know, advocacy can be really hard work. But, you know, if you can make connections with your legislators, you can make a difference. You know, it may be a long process, but you can make a difference. I'm here because I didn't want the bill to be a vanity bill with just Nick's name on it. I wanted it to have meaning and purpose. And that's what I'm here, and I'm going to continue to do until it does. You know, sadly, another volunteer died with almost circumstances identical to what happened with Nick and his medical care. And that was heartbreaking for me. And I don't want to see that ever happen again. I didn't want to see it happen after Nick died. And so to have it happen again in 2018 was very difficult for me. And so my purpose is to just make sure that the PCMOs get the training that they need, that the Peace Corps is held accountable in training these individuals. So.
Absolutely, Sue. And I think that speaks to the need. We've talked a lot about the implementation and the accountability and making sure that we are seeing through that legislation. We also need to make sure that that legislation follows through. So in that drive to a lot of the discussion that we've been having today, encouraging you out there to help in this initiative and to help advance the opportunities presented in the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act, which could be coming in before the House Foreign Affairs Committee as early as this week. For those of us that heard remarks from Representative John Garamendi on Wednesday, you can help in this process. Visit NPCA's Advocacy Action Center. We have tools to help you reach out to your members of Congress. Many of these are electronic, as Sue mentioned. Getting in front of people, building those relationships makes it easier to get in front of people and hold those meetings. So starting with these tools is a way to ignite that process and drive this movement forward. In closing, I just want to express my gratitude to each of our panelists for sharing your stories. This is a difficult conversation. These difficult conversations will continue, and we just so appreciate your willingness to engage with us and to help understand more broadly the issues and how we can improve them as we look ahead. So thank you so much.